This was shared on the GameSpot channel just yesterday. So I'm going to take a look at this. Haven't seen this yet. I want to see exactly what the devs have to say about Season 2.
I'm Chris Wilson, production director over the live service for Diablo 4.
And I'm Rod Ferguson, general manager of all things Diablo.
So Season 2 is going to be launching on October 17th, and it's called The Season of Blood. We're really excited because this is going to be a new vampire threat is essentially invading Sanctuary.
And it's kind of interesting. It's the same theme as Immortal, which they just launched sort of their vampire hero, the Blood Knight, which is basically a vampire. And now this is coming to Diablo 4. It's kind of cool.
So there's going to be a new quest line. So the player will be partnering with the new character named Eris, who's being voiced by Gemma Chan. So we're super excited to have her join our really, great ensemble of voice talent. And she thinks she's going to be a great fit for the game. And on top of that, the character is going to gain access to new vampiric powers that you'll be able to use.
My initial impression is vampiric powers. I wonder if this is going to be like the Caged Hearts that go, and I guess we're gonna have to learn here in a moment, but if it's like the Caged Hearts where it goes in your jewelry or something, it could kind of be Season 1 2.0.
Across all of the different classes to take out the new vampire threat that's invaded Sanctuary. So we'll have new legendary items and weapons, new uniques, and it's really gonna provide a whole new way to kind of like progress with your character and a new power fantasy.
Yeah, and then that's sort of the theme and story side of it. And then obviously with each season, as part of a live service, we want to do quality of life and make changes to the game sort of in the end game as well. And so one example of that is in Season 2, we're introducing 5 new additional bosses. Because we look at, what is the progress you make from level of, say, 50 to 100. And we wanted to have more milestones along the way where you can...
That's the correct mentality. I think 1 to 50 is the best part of the game. 50 to 70 is all right because you're kind of pushing to the next tier, and then you hit tier 4. Once you can farm tier 4 and do nightmare dungeons, it becomes very repetitive very quickly. So what I want to see is these in-game bosses effectively be just that in-game content, which is, in my opinion, desperately needed. I also like that he talked about new uniques and new legendary items. So hopefully those are something that keeps with. It's not just vampire powers, for the season. Hopefully that goes to the Eternal Realm as well.
I can test my build against these certain types of bosses. And we also know there's a huge desire for our uniques and the Uber uniques because they have a very low drop rate, and sometimes they really solidify your build. And so now with these 5 new bosses, you can actually target uniques, and you can go and have a much higher drop rate on an Uber unique than you would in the open world.
Those 5 bosses, obviously it's interesting because the way people approach this kind of stuff now is they're very invested. So like at the same time as being excited, there's a level of cynicism towards everything that is coming out. So I saw the 5 bosses, excitement, and then immediately people were like, are they just going to be reskins of a boss that we know 5 times? So
true. I mean, people do perceive things mostly negative because D4 bad is the meta. However, there's some truth to the feedback, which is, look, when they say 5 new, they said 5 new and returning bosses. So immediately what people thought was, okay, well, are we going to get, Blood Bishop again? Because the dungeons, there's 100+ dungeons. They said 100 and something unique dungeons, but then there's 8 bosses in those dungeons or whatever the amount is. So yes, it's critics and cynicism, but also it's kind of earned because there is a lot of repeated bosses. So I get why people would assume that. Obviously, off the top of the head, I would assume these are 5 new in-game bosses. They're not going to do a new in-game boss and have it be Blood Bishop or the same guy that you have in the tutorial. I would assume they're new bosses, but it could be Copium.
So can you talk about what those 5 bosses will actually entail?
It's a mixture of sort of new and sort of, one of the things we heard a lot from players was I don't think we've ever even talked much about it, where the bosses are coming from, but there's a notion of I play these campaign bosses and I didn't necessarily get to fight them ever again unless I'm playing the campaign. So that's part of the inspiration.
True.
So there's going to be definitely ways we can leverage content we've had, but also new content as well.
That would be the best version of returning bosses. If returning bosses means bosses that we beat in the campaign, like Astaroth, for instance, there's Andaro, there's all these different bosses that we play through the campaign that we never see again. If those come back as pinnacle versions of the bosses, in my opinion, these are best case scenario. That's best case scenario.
And so but the fact that we're doing it in the seasonal and the Eternal is going to be really exciting. And again, that idea of we've heard a lot of feedback around the Uber unique. So, and what's really interesting is that actually it's a boss ladder. So it's not like in Diablo 2 where you would just go farm a boss over and over and over and over again. There's actually sort of prerequisites to be able to summon a boss.
Okay.
You have to go through the bosses to get there. And so it actually has its own gameplay involved in even having a boss appear.
What happens when something goes out into the world when do you start to pick up on the general sentiment from the audience?
Immediately.
What is it? Data points? Is it social media? How do you know what the sentiment is?
Social media
So with live
immediately.
service development, I mean, we're always paying attention to the community. So we're looking at all sources of feedback. We solicit surveys to some of our players, so we use that as one kind of funnel for information. We look at telemetry and data that's like coming back from like, the back end. So we kind of see like where there are pain points or friction from just looking at data. But then also we're paying attention to forums. When we do a blog post or release patch notes, we're trying to look at like what is the response, what are things that are coming back from the community, and we use that to kind of help inform some of the decision points for the future. And so what's great with the live service is like between seasons, patches, hot fixes, there's numerous kind of vehicles for us to kind of like inject change and evolve the game for the future. And it's always in pursuit of making the best possible experience for the players.
So I'll tell you one thing is I know people will debate whether or not if they're executing properly upon the feedback, but there's no doubt in my mind that they are aware of the feedback. I think that they see the feedback. I think it's probably arguable that they are struggling to deliver upon the feedback at times, but I know they're aware of it, and I know that they know that they can't ignore the feedback. So you can call it copium if you want, but I think this season, give it a few seasons, give this game, give it a few seasons, they're probably going to address the feedback. I think the problem is they're losing players, they're bleeding out players in the now time, basically. But give it a few seasons, we should have probably a pretty solid game at that point.
Yeah, it's one of the big challenges is really around the idea of the vocal minority. Like sometimes a very small group can be very loud, and that's why we use things like surveys. Like, because you're always managing sort of the qualitative information you get, where people's just opinions, and then the quantitative information you have, which is the actual data that shows what's actually happening. And it's in a game where it's sort of built on.
I hope he's not going down the rabbit hole of just like, oh, well, people that are complaining are just loud. Like I've been fairly, I would say I've been fairly defensive of the game, but even though I'm at the point where I have to address like the concerns as well. And it's not a vocal minority that is complaining about the game. In my opinion, it's a vocal majority. I think the majority of the players realize the in-game has an issue, in my own personal opinion. I think that there's plenty of people that play it casually, that play the game, but then those people are quitting the game after they get to like level 70, 80, and that is because they're a casual person, they move on to the next game. But the people that are still in the game and the people that are still actively playing the game every day, I think it's a majority at this point. All are aware and addressing what the issues are. So I hope that the pushback on this isn't like, oh, we're just, people are whining and they're the vocal minority. I hope that's not his point.
Power fantasy, like everybody loves candy, right? And so but you can't have candy all the time. And so that's one of the hard parts about managing is that sometimes there's a little bit of medicine and you need some sugar to go with it, right? And so as we're looking at our feedback and we're looking at what we need to do to balance the world, because we want every build to be playable and we want every build to be viable. And so sometimes you have to sort of manage that across all the different classes and all the different builds. And sometimes you need a little medicine. And I think one of the things as we look at season 1, we want to really show that we're being responsive and reactive.
But the medicine, I'm going to push back a little bit on this because the medicine for this game is Diablo 4 is sick, and it's sick from a lack of content. It's not that we all just want more legendaries. Like, I don't really see the feedback of people saying, we just want more drops. Like, everyone has enough drops, so much so that the stash is full. We don't need more candy. The medicine that he's referring to, I think, is things like nerfs, where it's like, oh, well, this is, you guys might not be aware of it, but this is what you need. I kind of disagree. Like, the medicine for me is actually more things to do. Like, the sickness that needs to be saved here isn't that we just want more dopamine. Like, we want a reason to log into the game. Like, that's my take.
Active and being agile, but we sort of got 2/3 of the way there, and we had a lot of the medicine, but we didn't have the sugar yet. And so, but to be able to act quickly, we sort of said, well, that's good. We've got the fix, but when we didn't bring and here's the other fun part that makes that balance work. And so I think that's part of the criticism of season 1 is that we did the medicine, didn't quite yet do the sugar, and then
okay. So he's not pushing back. He's admitting they're admitting fault.
The live streams is that moving forward, anytime we have to do any sort of significant balance, we'll always have that other side of it, like because it's really about we're making the game for player joy. We're making the game the best game we can for players, and so. But sometimes they have to have a salad. They can't have ice cream for dinner every night, and so you just have to kind of balance your messaging, manage expectations, communicate more openly, and I think we're doing that now as we go into season 2.
You mentioned it earlier, but how do you account for the vocal minority in a way that feels like you're speaking to them, but also not balancing that with the realistic kind of achievements that you can do? Because it's obviously like Diablo 4 comes out, everyone's super positive, and everyone is like really up on it, and the vast majority of people are enjoying it. But then the conversation quickly turns into like, this is missing, that is missing. But that conversation is very much defined and pushed by a group of people that are at level 100 or AE, and they're the only people that are like really vocal.
Right.
So it can seem like when people are looking at it, oh, this is a really pervasive issue, and it's actually just a small group of people.
I don't like that opinion. I've said that I don't think most people are going to get to 100, but I think a lot of people will get to 70 and 80. I don't think it's a small group of people complaining about the game, and I think the people that are complaining about the game are the people that are supporting it the most, which are playing it the most at the moment. So kind of, I don't know if I like this line of like thinking of, it's how do we deal with the fact that it's just a small group of people? It kind of seems like dismissive of the complaints. Like this is like it's reviewers saying this. I've even seen like some casual people that make it to like 70, 80 and then get bored. The hardcore people are saying this. All of the major Diablo partners and content creators are seeing this. All of the guide builders are saying this isn't a small group. This is most of the people who play the game at the level that they would want them to play the game, which is all day, every day. Like basically they want people to grind their game. These people are grinding their game and saying there's a problem. So I kind of don't like this line of questioning about like, how do we deal with this? Just a small group of people. Like it's a lot of people, guys.
How do you like approach that? And is there anything that you do to try and tell your own team like, hey, I know it looks like this, but we have to think about everyone, and how do you message that out as well?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think the quantitative data really helps there, so you can actually see what's happening with the game, and you can go like, oh, this might be an issue for people who are level 100, and this is the percentage of people who've actually gotten there so far, and we can sort of look at how big of an issue that actually is. But I mean,
but you should also look into the fact that people aren't getting to level 100 because they get bored. So it's like, oh, well, only 1% of people get to 100, but that's a symptom of a problem. Like if people aren't getting to 100 because they don't want to, then that's, in my opinion, that's kind of like, that's data also, right?
I don't want to say vocal minority to be dismissive, because sometimes that vocal minority are also your influencers and the people who are, the tastemakers who will be like, hey, this is how we feel about it, and you want to take that in as well. And that's why it's always is a balance between knowing what are we hearing and what are we seeing in the game and what are we feeling when we play. And I think that notion of like, hey, one of the things we were excited about with D4 is that as a mainline game, no other Diablo game actually had any end game at all. Like when the campaign rolled credits, you were done. And so we were really happy with D4 to have Helltide and Nightmare Dungeons and the Tree of Whispers and PvP. And so we felt like this was a great starting place. And so when we talked, even if you go back to our interviews pre-launch, we would talk about...
I think it's fair to give him the point that it is a good starting place. I think that's fair. I probably will get some shit for this, but I think Diablo 4 has good bones. I don't think it's unsalvageable. I do believe Diablo 4 can become a great game. I think it will become a pretty good game in a few seasons. I think right now there's a lack of content. I think once we get more content added into the game, a fix from 80 to 100 in terms of boredom, basically, is what I really want to see, then I think there's actually something there. And I think the more that we add to the end game, the better the game's going to get. I don't think it's unfair at all to give him that point. It does have good bones. It is a good starting structure. The overworld's pretty cool. There's a lot they can add in. It's a little barren of a wasteland right now, but like the actual structure of the game isn't actually that bad. Like we get these new in-game bosses, make Nightmare Dungeons a little bit more exciting, yada, yada, yada. We add some more things, maybe make PvP a little bit better as well. There's a lot they can still do, which I think is what he's trying to say, which is a true point.
This is the beginning and not the ending of Diablo. This is a foundation we're building upon. And you're seeing that, like in season 2 with these 5 additional bosses, in season 3 we're going to be bringing in leaderboards. Like this is an evolution of a game over time. And so
yeah, that's all fair.
You can kind of grind your way to 100 and go like, what the heck? Where's everything I was expecting? Like all that stuff is being layered in over time as we go, and we're continuing to make the game, better and better. So
I think that's totally fair. Like it's unfinished is I think a way to say it. I feel like the game, after playing for a bit, I feel like the game is It was released either a little earlier, it's a little unfinished. I think once it is finished, it'll be a pretty good game. And that is most of the sentiment I've actually seen from this vocal minority as well. Most of the people aren't saying the game is complete trash and unsalvageable. Most of the people I'm saying are like have complaints about like add these things into the game and we have something. I find myself to be in that same category. Add a really good in-game and we have a pretty solid game. Because the 1 to 50 and the basically getting to World Tier 4 and the campaign, which is fire, by the way, campaign's fire. All of that is good. All of that is good, enjoyable gameplay. 1 to 70 is pretty fire in my opinion. 1 to 50 especially so. Campaign is rock hard solid, okay? The seasons are a little lackluster. Add better seasonal content, add in-game content, we got something.
It really is just sort of like, definitely take in what you hear, but also, trust but verify, go and see what the data is telling you as well.
In addition to that, I think the other important piece of this is transparency, right? So we're really trying to create and be open with our community about setting expectations. Like, here's what we're trying to do in the near future, releasing patch notes early, really just having live streams, the campfire chats, letting our audience know, like, here's what we're trying to do in the short term. Here are things we want to even do in the medium term.
The campfire
like
chats are good.
Leaderboards for season 3. Like, we're trying to just be more open about that information versus like holding everything to the vest.
And Vid Joe in our last, he talked about philosophy. Like, here's why we're doing certain things. Because I think it's one thing to say what you're doing, another thing to say why you're doing it. And so I think helping people understand, like, oh, this is our goal, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and just give some background to why these decisions are being made.
You guys have been quite candid with, the patch came out and it nerfed some stuff, and you're like, okay, we did it wrong, we won't do that again. And then you talked about all the vehicles you have to kind of approach it. How do you feel about the expectation that creates? Because it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Where you're like,
I just want to kind of pause for a second. So the fact that they came out with sort of an emergency campfire chat and said they're not going to, took the L, basically, I was kind of happy that they actually took the L because it showed a willingness to actually listen to feedback. I'll be honest, if they had come out after that nerf patch and just started being like, well, it's a vocal minority, there's not really any problems with it, let me explain the flaw. I actually said, and I guessed that, and I was wrong, that what they were going to do is come out and no, let me explain it, it's really not a big deal. But they really just took the L, which in my opinion made me have a little bit more faith in it, and then they reverted some of the issues as well. So that gives me some more faith and gives them some more time to go through and add the stuff I'm asking for.
We can react, but then the expectation from the audience is when they demand something, they need it immediately. And they're like, why do you put it? How do you guys as developers feel about that? And how do you try and manage those expectations?
It is a balancing act, depending on what it is we're trying to address. I mean, it can obviously take development time to get it right? You don't want to be too hasty to just rush, change, because you may end up imbalancing the game in a different way that you maybe didn't foresee. So you have to take your time to really think through, okay, how do we want to address the problem that's been flagged? Look at it in terms of priority as well. There's oftentimes competing priorities. So it's making sure you're targeting the thing that's going to have the biggest impact for the player first and foremost, and then finding the right time to release those things. And so it's just really a balancing act that our leadership and our designers have to really kind of work through for each issue as it comes through.
Yeah, it's also complexity of the development process. When we look at, we have essentially 3 teams working on the seasonal side. There's we have our odd teams, so doing season 1, then season 3, then season 5. We have our even teams doing season 2, season 4, and then we have another team that's focused on what's going on in the live game. And so on top of those 3 teams, who are the odds and evens are leapfrogging each other. We've got our live team, and then we actually have an expansion team working as well. And so when we hear a piece of feedback, there's always a conversation. If we agree with it, then it's is this a short term? Hey, we can do that as a hot fix overnight. Is this more of a patch that has to come in 2 weeks? Or actually it's something we're going to address next season because of the way that, we're a lot of the ways, that's part of the thing. When we put out season 1 was finished when we released. And so there was no real player feedback yet, other than sort of the beta feedback. But after launch, season 1 was kind of done. And so that's why we use that preseason time to tweak as much as we could, and why we...
Yeah, that's why I'm giving it to season 3. In my opinion, because season 1 was basically ready to be shipped on launch of the game. They had to have that in the backlog, basically, to buy themselves development time for all of this stuff post-launch. So season 2, we give things like fixes to resistance and the in-game content additions. And then by season 3, in my opinion, which I know it's 9 months after the launch of the game, because I've had baby by now, but basically when season 3 comes out, That is like they had season 2 to develop season 3, and season 1 gave them the time to fix all of the issues. So by season 2, the issues should be fixed and in-game should be added. And by season 3, that's when the first real major season should happen. So I'm giving it till then. And then I've said many times, if by season 3 I'm not feeling it, then I'm just done with Diablo 4 basically, and I'm going to move on to just full-time variety stuff. But I'm willing to give it to season 3. I know not everyone's going to be willing to. I know people are going to call it copium and all that, but I'm willing to give it to season 3 to see how the game shakes out, because I actually believe what Brod's saying. Like, I know season 1 was ready on development. Season 2, they're probably trying to cram in as many fixes as they possibly can for all the stuff people are complaining about and add some in-game. And then, in my opinion, season 3 is really when they got that's their shot. That's their one chance.
Remove the need for the altars of Lilith and that kind of thing. So it's just that notion that like the trains are always running, right? The trains are always leaving the station, and what can get on which train is always part of the balancing act of like, oh yeah, we agree with that feedback. Now which train can we actually make it on, and are we willing to delay other things to make that happen? Because I think sometimes people just feel like it's always additive, and really it's kind of like there's only so much scope that a team can do. And so to say like, oh, this new idea wants to come in, well then that means usually another idea needs to get postponed. And so when we're talking about the prioritization, it's like, oh, we want to do this, are we willing to slow down this other thing? And so that's definitely one of the things, the give and takes you have to do when you're balancing.
I don't want to say misunderstanding, but a lot of the kind of discussion is also attributed to things like the battle pass system and the season model as well. And some people say it doesn't feel like it works in Diablo, and we've had other people make games similarly, like the Path of Exile, keep looking at and being like, we're learning a lot from the viability of something like a battle pass model. How often do you kind of like reassess that? And
I'll be honest, I'm so over the conversations about battle pass. I don't actually think the battle pass is a big deal at all. I think that it's completely free. You don't have to buy it. The buying it's just cosmetics. The ashes give you like a 12% experience boost, which you can't even pay for anyway. It's only from the free portion of it. You're not going to outpace the purchasable portion of it. So therefore, there's no pay to win at all. People are still complaining about the battle pass. I understand the argument of it's a $70 game and they're also selling microtransactions. I don't care if you sell cosmetics. I don't care in any game if you sell cosmetics. It doesn't bother me if they want to make more money by selling cosmetics, as long as there are still good looking models in the game, and the cosmetics aren't the only good looking models. So you're basically paywalled to look like a clown unless you actually have good cosmetics. I'm perfectly fine with cosmetics. I'm over people asking questions about this.
do you think it does still work in this day and age? Especially because it's like a lot of cosmetic stuff and you don't want to upset the balance, and when it is like you can't put a lot of meaningfully changing content in there, is it even worth doing? How do you approach like looking at that kind of system?
I think that's what we're learning now. Like, that's like one of the things is like we're having lots of conversation about the first time we've done something, and so in times we'll come together and we'll go like, hey everybody, this is one data point, and we're looking at season 1 and like, what's the battle pass doing? What's the shop doing? What is the seasonal reset doing? How do we feel about it? And it's like, at the end of the day, it's one data point. And so I'm really excited for season 2 on October 17th, because that's now we'll have 2 data points to go like, okay, how many people are playing? How many people are engaging with Battle Pass and Shop? How's it all working? And so I think this is all learning for us. Like, I know people tend to think like, oh, you had 10 years with Diablo 3, you must know everything. And the answer is very different games, very different team. And so and obviously the industry's changed in the last 10 years. So for us, this is a lot of learning for us. So we're going to, make some mistakes as we're trying to make the game better and better.
Yeah. Do you think there's kind of like a different expectation on a team like the Diablo team, or even a developer like Blizzard? Yeah, because obviously you're seen as one of the biggest developers in the world. But the thing,
I see where he's going with this question. So basically, it's like, are Blizzard held to a different standard? I think Blizzard is always going to take PRLs almost no matter what they do. That's not saying that it's impossible for them to take a W, but for the most part, like, they're going to get roasted. Blizzard has been getting negative PR kind of continually. There's entire channels dedicated to just talking about how evil Blizzard is, etc. I try to give balanced takes, but look, even if I come out here and be like, there's things I like about Blizzard, things I don't like, just saying there's things I do like it's enough to get me targeted by these types of people. So Blizzard seems to be in a position where they almost can't win no matter what they do. Now, I know some people will respond by just saying, well, just make a good game. If Diablo 4 was good, be universally praised and all that. Sure, there's probably some truth to if they made the game better, it wouldn't be received as negatively. But when's the last time you guys have seen some positive Blizzard headlines? I mean, these guys managing PR have got to be some of the most stressful positions in gaming in the world right now. They just get roasted in the ground
The
continually.
thing that you're introducing is still quite new to you. There's the expectation, well, this is Blizzard. They shouldn't be allowed to stumble or able to stumble. They should know this stuff. Like, how do you kind of like approach that sentiment, knowing that there's no like pushing back against it?
I mean, I think it's just
Impossible question to answer.
We're all kind of just working our way through it. It's like sure, we have a lot of benefits of being part of Blizzard, and we had a lot of learnings, and we were able to talk to each other and understand what's going on in WoW and what's going on in Overwatch, and we can talk to each other. But at the end of the day, this team is like doing a live service like this is new for this team, and even we have some D3 veterans and things, but a lot of our team there's a good part of our team where Diablo 4, we were at the launch party where I was like, how many people, this is your first game ever? And like a bunch of hands go up and you're like, this is the very first game they've ever shipped is Diablo 4. And so there's definitely like the combination of experience and the ability to access Blizzard, but like we're still going to learn as we go. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I get hey, you're Blizzard, you should never make a mistake. But at the same time, like, again, the industry is always changing, the games are always changing, the players are always changing. So it's just going to be learning as we go. And that's why what I love about a live service is we can evolve over time. It's not a fixed state. And so that with each season, and we're going to support the game for years to come, is that we can evolve and learn as we go.
I think what's fascinating about that is because we
It's a
have
hard
studio
question
like
to
you
answer.
guys where you very much are like figuring it out as you go along to a degree, and it's kind of like the expectation is why you.
I want to point out one thing too. Like, I actually like that he's doing a surprising amount of admitting, like, well, we're just figuring it out. Like, we made some mistakes. We're trying. Like, I love to see it when people are willing to admit, we're trying. You know what I mean? Like, so often there's a lot of, I feel like, BS of like, oh no, like it's the why I thought they were going down with the vocal minority thing. Like, I thought they just like blame the players, blame the audience. Like, it's not. But to his credit, Rod's credit there, he's kind of feeling, well, we're trying. He's saying they're trying, they're going to try to figure it out, et cetera. Which, regardless how you feel about me, I like that at least.
We should have the perfect product each time, and it's not thought of as great. But then on the flip side, you have a thing like Larian, which just put out one of the best RPGs in a long time, but it was developed over 3 years of iterating, very publicly forward-facing, and people are celebrating that right now. It must be kind of wild to be in an industry where you can have two contradicting kind of like narratives on the same thing going, and like how do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis as developers?
They all have that. I mean, I'm just really happy that this feels like the year of the RPG. And like at Starfield and Final Fantasy and Hogwarts, like all the stuff that's going on. So I'm just excited to be part of that. And I think they each have their own place when you think about like the turn-based versus the hack and slash versus the third person versus isometric. Like I think it's really cool that the RPGs can have such a diversity. And so I don't know. I just think it's great that RPGs is really coming to the top this year.
All right, so this one, if you want to watch this without my commentary, I'll have a link down below that's on GameSpot there. But surprising amount of admittance of working it out as they go. I actually really like seeing that type of stuff.